and today what we're going to be talking about is motivation and the training principles. So for motivation, we're just going to be talking about the two different kinds. So there's intrinsic and then extrinsic motivation.
And for the training principles, we're going to hit on 6 different training principles that you guys probably already know. It'll probably just be a little bit of review, but we just want to make sure that you guys understand these principles and that your programming should be backed by these principles.
Enjoy watching.
Let's go.
Alright, so what we're going to be discussing about is motivation. Motivation is just the currency to get stuff done.
Or in other words, to get shit done.
So with motivation, there's 2 different kinds. There's intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic is the one that basically comes within you. This is the one that you want to do with your client or what you want to reach for at the end when training your client. So with this, there's a principle called CAR, and there's 3 different levels for its: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So when it's competence, this one is just doing something successfully. So, and then autonomy is having control or having a choice of doing something. So just having, for example, a client having control of what they want to do for their finisher. So say, do you want to do core, or do you want to do planks, or do you want to do bicycles? So being able to have them choose. And then for relatedness, this is the ability to react with others. So with intrinsic motivation, this is the most powerful form of motivation. You want to do this constantly with your client during your training sessions. The next form of motivation is extrinsic motivation. So this one comes from an external force. If you guys remember the example of the football kids who were playing in the professor's yard where they gave them money each time they played, and he decreased the amount of money, they stopped showing up. So this is from an external force. So there's 3 different kinds of, you can say, categories for extrinsic motivation. This is punishments versus rewards. So punishments is just saying something that a client is getting for not doing something right. So for example, they did not clean up their weight, so they're getting punished by doing burpees. And then rewards is if your client did something good, they're getting something like a reward. The most common form of rewards that you'll be able to see, for example, in like a weight and strength and conditioning facility, is getting a t-shirt based on if you hit a certain weight goal. Shame versus guilt. Shame is basically just saying, I am bad. So for example, for being shamed, a client didn't show up, so you write an email to your client saying, hey, I saw that you didn't show up today. I'm just wondering if you are okay. This is gonna get that client's getting that shame feel. And then guilt is, I did something wrong. You do not want to do this with your clients because then they're not going to achieve their goals. And then valuing the behavior, that's just basically you do not like to do it, but you get the results that you want. So a good example for valuing the behavior is you're changing your cat litter box, but you don't like doing it, but you like the outcome of it since it's going to be clean and it smells good. Remember, in extrinsic motivation, punishments and rewards, be careful with what you're doing with the punishments and rewards. Shame and guilt, this is not what you want to do. And then valuing the behavior, you don't like the outcome, or you don't like doing the activity, but you like the outcome.
So first we're going to talk about the principle of overload, which refers directly to the amount of load that the person is lifting in their workout with their movements. So when we talk about the overload principle, we can look at the GAS model that involves stress and adaptations. So the GAS model involves these 3 steps. So the first step is that we are going to sense that stimulus in the alarm phase, and then 2, the body will resist and it will either exhaust or adapt. So if the body exhausts, that's when we get into that overtraining, and that's bad. We don't want that for our clients. And ideally we want to adapt, and then the body would have kind of like a super compensation, or the body overloads progressively. And that brings us into our next training principle, progression. Sometimes you hear these put together as like the principle of progressive overload, which is fine and that makes sense, but we think it's best to explain them separately so you guys understand them separately first. So the principle of progression involves this FITT acronym, so frequency, intensity, time, and type.
Here I have this graphic that reiterates the FITT acronym that we were talking about, but I did also want to say that the last thing I said about progression and overload as separate principles was a little confusing, but overload refers to like an increase in that stress. Like the body needs an increase in stress to be able to see adaptations. And then progression is more, how are we going to progressively, or like at what rate are we going to increase that load? So that kind of plays into the FITT acronym. So with frequency, intensity, time, and type, we can manipulate those to progressively overload the body and cause adaptations. Here's a chart to further explain the GAS, or General Adaptation Syndrome model. So this chart relates resistance and time. So it just shows that our resistance decreases in that alarm stage, and then it increases as we resist that stressor, and then it will gradually keep decreasing if we actually hit that exhaustion phase versus adapting. Picture shows Milo of Croton. He was a famous wrestler way back when ancient Greece was around, and the story goes that he carried a baby calf with him like for years and years and years until the calf grew into an adult ox, and every time that he carried the calf as it grew, he got stronger and stronger. So this kind of explains those principles of overload and progression.
Okay, so the next training principle we're going to talk about is specificity, and I feel like sometimes people get confused with this one, but don't make it any harder than it has to be. So this acronym here stands for specific adaptations to impose demands. So for example, if I am a soccer player, I am going to do stuff in my training that involves my soccer skills so I can improve on those skills. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of resistance training and get super jacked because I'm a soccer player. Like a bodybuilder would do that, you know, or people who want to compete in more strength power sports. A soccer player, their training would look more like some probably sprinting drills, more endurance-based, more aerobic-based stuff versus anaerobic. So if we want those specific adaptations for our sport or our competition, whatever, then you want to train specifically exactly what you're wanting to improve. So next we have individuality, and this just basically says that if I give two people the same training program, they're both going to progress and adapt differently. So here I have a note about the genetic ceiling. So this kind of just explains how beginners actually progress faster than those with a higher skill level, or like athletes, for example. So if a beginner might see a lot more results in like 4 to 6 weeks than an athlete does, because as they get closer to their genetic ceiling for training, like an athlete would be closer to their genetic ceiling, it's going to be a lot harder for them to see those adaptations, and it's going to take a lot more work for them to get those adaptations. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the principle of reversibility, and this principle is pretty simple. It's just use it or lose it. So if you don't use your muscles, you don't use your skills, your muscles will atrophy and your skills will get dull. And here I have a note about the rate of decay. I will show you a chart in a minute and I will explain this in more depth. So next we have rest and recovery principle. So this is pretty simply exactly what it's saying. Rest and recovery is important in training. Most of our adaptations can fully occur while we're resting and recovering. And I have a chart on the overtraining continuum where we talk a little bit about fatigue, and then functional versus non-functional overreaching and overtraining, and I will explain that more in depth in a second as well.
This chart shows the rate of decay that I was referring to in the previous video with the principle of reversibility. So you can see that aerobic capacity goes first and the most quickly, and then anaerobic lactic capacity, power, speed, and then last to go is maximal strength. Next is the overtraining continuum that I was talking about before. So as we can see on here, this graphic actually has a lot of information on it. I really like this graphic. So it shows that fatigue is more of a condition where we can recover quickly, 24 to 48 hours. And then we get into overreaching, and there's functional and non-functional. So functional overreaching is whenever a person trains so hard that their performance might decrease a little bit, but then ultimately it's going to increase a lot. And that's why it's functional overreaching versus non-functional overreaching. So non-functional overreaching is like we push, and we keep pushing in our training, but we don't actually end up seeing that increase in performance that we see with functional overreaching. But then overreaching, the non-functional overreaching versus overtraining, is differentiated by that time that's needed for recovery. So it takes a lot longer to recover from overtraining syndrome than non-functional overreaching.
Parkour. Parkour. Parkour.
Parkour! Michael, parkour! Parkour!
Extreme.
Parkour!
Yes, that was bad. That was weird. No, I think it's fine. Okay. And then we'll just do like, Rachel, I'm Emily. In case you don't remember us from the last two hilarious videos that we made. I was like, in case you forgot my name, because most people don't really know my real name. It's going whenever you're ready. Oh! Okay, I just didn't want to go back.